In this video, I want to talk about ADHD or attention problems and explain to you my experience with being like this and having that diagnosis. And, what I realized that made this not become a problem anymore. So, ever since I was a kid, I always had extreme novelty seeking tendencies. I remember from the first time that I ever got my own device, I was just so addicted to video games, mobile games, and if I was allowed to, I would probably spend the entire day just playing video games and eating candy. That was another thing. I could eat insane amounts of junk food. God only knows how I didn't get fat. I probably have eaten 10,000 calories in a day before. Anyways, so as I got older, I was always very able to do well in school, even though my attention was so bad, because I just didn't find school that challenging. And so no one ever really thought that anything was wrong with me, and I don't think anything's wrong with me either, to be honest, but you'll see why I'm saying that later. So I would do well in school, but that didn't mean that I wasn't procrastinating an extreme amount. Whenever I had everything, I would do at the last second. So I basically had all the stereotypical ADHD tendencies, you could say, when I was a kid, and it was never a problem, really. So then I went to college, and that was the first time that I was on my own. It was the first time that I didn't have my parents sort of pressuring me to do well in school. And so I started doing a lot worse. In college you get a lot more freedom, you get a lot of work ahead of time. You don't have as much work, you have more exams, right? And so I would, do the same thing I did in high school. I wouldn't study until like the last second. And this time it was a lot harder for me to get away like that. So eventually this just drove me to be really depressed, and I wasn't doing well in anything. And I was like, there must be something wrong with me. I was kind of in that victim mentality. I thought that someone else should just come along and solve my problems for me, kind of the way that we're all brainwashed to be a little bit. And so, my parents allowed me to go to a specialist and get tested, etc. So I went and did the whole, array of tests that they do, and they said that I had ADHD. The first thing that I want to talk about is, as soon as I received that diagnosis, it was like my perspective of myself completely shifted in a negative way. I was reading online about it and how people who had it were likely to make less money and die sooner and all of these outrageous things. And so it made me kind of adopt the identity of someone who couldn't control their attention. And what do you think that did? It made me even less able to control my attention. So then, of course, what happens next when you go down these routes? You get prescribed medication. So I started taking Adderall, and when I first took it, of course, obviously, it made me focus. It made me, have infinite energy and mental stamina and to just do all the stuff that I was refusing to do before. And so at first I was like, wow, I really cracked the code on this one, until, not even a month of using it, and I was feeling absolutely terrible. I had lost a lot of sleep. I had not been eating, and I just become a completely different person. And I got my schoolwork done, but what the hell does that even matter? Anyways, I don't think that my symptoms were due to low dopamine levels. So taking medication like that really messed me up because my dopamine was not low. So yeah, I stopped taking that, and I had to slowly recover myself after that because of how much these things will, mess up your brain chemistry, downregulate your receptors, etc. So, why was that happening to me in the first place? Why did I have ADHD symptoms my whole life? It was because all of the things that I was being presented with, that I was being pushed to do, were not things that I actually wanted to do or things that inspired me at all, namely school. So all the things that I was doing in school were, really boring to me. And I was am a very intellectually curious person, I wanted to know more about science, even when I was a kid. But the stuff that we learned in school is just not it's just not the stuff that matters. Like, some of it is interesting, understanding how the bigger picture of life comes together, is really interesting to me. But it almost felt like I was always learning something that by itself didn't give me any insights. And I just wanted insights. That's why learning would be fun, right? So I think that ADHD nowadays is, a dopamine problem partially. We are absolutely frying our dopamine systems in many ways, but I'll make a separate video where I talk about how to optimize your dopamine in a healthy way. But there's also another component that's really important to consider, and that's, is your attention failing because your brain is failing to work, or is your attention failing because you are so far out of alignment that you have a visceral reaction to whatever it is you're trying to force yourself to do? And I think the second one is what I was dealing with. So just because you have no motivation to do homework does not mean you have ADHD, because what do? You go and are able to play video games for 10 hours in a row. You do not have attention problems. You have a problem, maybe you're desensitized, but you have a problem with what you are being forced to focus on. So this might sound like irresponsible advice, but I think that you should allow your attention to go where it wants to go. I think that, vices aside, if you can get rid of the things you know are vices, then you should allow your curiosity to take you where it takes you, and you should use your attention for what comes naturally to it. Because think about it, no matter how much if you're like a really smart person, no matter how much you force your attention to force your brain to become really good at math or something, maybe you could become really good at math. But if you hate math, you will never become as good at math as you could have been at the thing that you love doing. You gain the most mastery in a subject when it's like fun, when it's like play. That's when you become really good at something, because you will keep on focusing, for 10 hours straight. And you will actually use your gifts in a productive way. Being told that because you can't focus on something absolutely useless and boring, that something's wrong with you and you should just crank up the dial, and it's as simple as that, is absolutely insane, frankly. So definitely don't take those kind of meds. As I said, I'll make a video on how to optimize your dopamine so that is not even a consideration. But it seems like people are using similar lines of thinking to justify all kinds of stimulants like nicotine and energy drinks and all these things. People will be like, oh, I'm just having it to help me focus. It's a nootropic. But why are you torturing, why do you need to torture your body in order to get it to function? You're not using your body in the correct way. You're not focusing on what it is that you're supposed to be focusing on. So, if anything, what if your ADHD is just a super strong intuition? What if your intuition is so strong that you cannot ignore the fact that what you're focusing on is not aligned with you?